next we have Andrew. I'm going to get it right this time, Andrew. Andrew Falotico. Andrew is the Health and Safety Representative for the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU 113, a union that serves the interests of 12,000 Toronto Transit employees. Andrew oversees 54 joint health and safety committees and is currently working with the ATU International Union to assist in the development of health and safety training programs for local union safety committees. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you, Patricia. And I want to send out some acknowledgements, first of all, for those who are online watching the respective speakers, and also an acknowledgement to the speakers who are here today. And thank you for organizing the opportunity to speak about violence and harassment in the workplace. And I'd like to take the opportunity to reach out to everybody and let them know that the residual effect of violence and harassment in the workplace leads to a hazard called a psychosocial hazard, which we'll talk about a little bit more in my presentation, which leads to a lot of stress and triggers and trauma, which potentially could lead to PTSD. And considering that in Canada, in the month of May, we're recognizing this week particularly as Mental Health Week, I'd like for everybody to think about that and consider that as we look through this presentation. So I'm going to begin, and in our overview today, we're going to look at workplace violence and harassment. And because I'm associated with the Toronto Transit Commission representing the union workers, we're going to look at some examples of TTC operator assaults. Joint Labor Management Committee, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, which is recently formed, workplace violence harassment feedback survey, which is ongoing right now with our union. And we're going to talk about risk assessment, which will lead to some takeaways on some of the tools that I'd like to present and offer to the viewers and listeners of today. So I think most importantly, I think we need to take a look at what is the definition of workplace violence, and this is relevant to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we're going to go through this. So workplace violence is the exercise of physical force or against an employee in the workplace that causes or could cause physical injury. Attempt to exercise physical force or against an employee in the workplace that could have physical injury, and statements or behaviors that are reasonable to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force or against the employee that could cause physical injury. Now, I want to make a point here that in Canada, our workers have 3 rights to refuse to participate and to know about workplace hazards. So the right to refuse work that is likely to endanger you, workplace violence can be exercised under Section 43, subsection 3 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act to perform a work refusal. So just keep that in mind. So if you're at work and there's a perceived threat of violence, or you believe that you're going to be in danger of violence, you can do a work refusal to protect yourself. And I think that's noteworthy. Let's take a look at the definition of harassment. So workplace harassment can involve unwelcome words, actions embarrassing and humiliating from worker groups. It can also include isolate or even discriminate against targeted individuals, making remarks, jokes, innuendos, displaying or circulating offensive pictures or materials, bullying, repeated offense or intimidating phone calls or emails, or workplace sexual harassment. In the next slide, we are taking a look at the work environment of the Toronto Transit Commission that involves operators. So operator assaults, we have 3 categories for operator assaults. One is the common assault, little or no injury, including spitting. Secondly, assaults causing bodily harms or with a weapon, minor injury where a weapon was used or an object was used as a weapon. Aggravated assaults, bodily harm with hospitalization required. So these stats actually come from 2021, the last quarter. So a total of 67 operator assaults occurring during the first quarter, and 93 were classified as common assaults, 7% were classified as assault causing bodily harm with a weapon, and 0% were classified as aggravated assault. Now, I do want to make a point here that there might be some people questioning, well, you know, we're talking about operators as frontline employees of the Toronto Transit Commission, union workers, and they're engaging with the public. Is that really a work environment? Yes, it is. The work environment for the operator is its workstation, it's the equipment that they're using, whether it's a bus or a subway. So it does fall under the legislation of the Occupational Health and Safety Act as a work environment. So the next slide looks at operator assaults distribution by mode. So 88% of operator assaults occurred on the surface routes, bus, streetcar, wheel trams, while 12% occurred on subway. So if we take a look at buses, so 78% assaults occurred on buses, streetcars were 7%, subways were 12%, and 3% were wheel trams. So if we take a look at operator assault distribution by motive, the most common motive for bus operator assaults was operating disputes. Common motive for assaults against the streetcar operators were based on alcohol or argument or operating disputes, and unprovoked was the leading cause for subway operator assaults. And this in this slide here, we take a look at a female operator, unfortunately, who was a victim, and a passenger who accused her of making him late became violent when she refused his demand to run a red light. And unfortunately, this man reached inside the cab, grabbed her radio handset, and began to beat her with it. She had suffered a concussion, broken nose in her face, and required 6 staples in her head. And although she returned to work almost 2 years ago after the attack, she is still seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma. This brings me to the point that I mentioned earlier about psychosocial hazards. So we have 6 classifications of hazards in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and one of them is psychosocial hazard. And everything that's being talked about here today, relevant to all the speakers, is going to lead to a situation or a condition that's going to affect someone perhaps mentally or emotionally or their well-being. That is a psychosocial hazard, something to consider. It hasn't really been talked about much in the last decade or so. It's starting to make an appearance for people to understand. We're getting a better understanding about the stigma relative to PTSD and, of course, other triggers and trauma. So just keep that in mind. So moving on with assaults, most recently on February the 16th, a bus driver was involved in a fare dispute with a group of suspects, and unfortunately was stabbed multiple times with a knife. And even a week before that, we had another operator in the subway system who was mauled and stabbed several times. So our ATU Local 113, that represents nearly 12,000 workers, we called upon the City of Toronto to work on developing a plan to protect our transit workers and also to protect our riders who deserve to have great service. This plan included increased enforcement with penalties, and what we decided to do moving forward as a union and talking with the TTC was to create a joint labor management committee. Now, all of you who are watching here today, I'm pretty much assuming that you're from Ontario, you're from Canada, and if that's the case, you have a joint health and safety committee. Now, whether you're on that committee or whether you're not on that committee, you're still represented by this committee. This particular committee here is specifically for violence and harassment in the workplace. And let's take a look. So why the need for this committee is because we have recognized the assaults and the acute emotional events resulting in workplace violence and harassment that are trending. And this Joint Labor Management Committee will make recommendations on workplace violence and harassment. So let's take a look at how this is structured. Now, for those of you who are on joint health and safety committees, part of the structure that we are creating with the involvement of dealing with harassment and violence in the workplace is, first of all the joint health and safety committees, every 30 days will have a meeting. And in that meeting, they will have an open standing item based on violence, harassment, bullying in the workplace. And they will look at every situation that has happened every 30 days to make sure that they have a risk assessment that lines up with the situation or the condition. They will then take that information and take it to the Joint Labor Management Committee so that we can get a full spectrum of what is going on with the 16,000 workers at the Toronto Transit Commission and have real-time data coming in and looking at what adjustments need to be made. Now, I want to make a point here. For those of you who are on joint health and safety committees, maybe you're chair, maybe you're a representative, through the Occupational Health and Safety Act under Section 32, that green book that's probably hanging up from your health and safety board, or maybe it's on your desk, and for those of you you might be carrying one around with right now. In Section 32, you have a responsibility to do a risk assessment every time there's an occurrence or there's an incident. Also, your employer has a policy that leads to creating a program that by legislation through the provisions of the Act must be reviewed annually or as many times as you necessarily believe that you need to review it. And here is a tool that is very important for you, for those who are on committees. You have the opportunity to be part of the development of the policy that protects the workers in your work environment. So one of my questions to all of you who are online, have you ever read your employer's policy? Have you read the program? And is it tailored to your needs or to your workers' needs? So moving forward, this committee will take the opportunity to advise the employer on programs that are necessary, advise the employer on proposed changes in the workplace, and ensure that incident investigations and regular inspections are carried out as required by the regulations. Furthermore, this committee will identify situations that may be at risk at workplace violence, harassment, and assault, consult workers and the employer on issues, and of course, once again, make recommendations to the employer for the improvement of the occupational health and safety of workers and be in compliance of the regulations. We're very fortunate in Canada to have very strong provisions under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. My concern is, are they being reviewed? Are they being used? And you'll have to ask yourself today, perhaps, have you ever actually looked at that to see how you can make a difference in your workplace, specifically when it deals with harassment or bullying or with violence? Our union took the opportunity to put out a workplace violence and harassment feedback survey. This survey is now in conclusion for the next, we are concluding, I think the next 5 days will be done. It's been very successful. The numbers are coming in, and hopefully maybe we can have a recap in a few months and I can share this information with you. But let's show you what we are doing with this survey. So the feedback survey identifies the weaknesses in the current policy and procedures and allow recommendations to be implemented through the Joint Health and Safety Committee worker members. Now, once again, for those of you who are on joint health and safety committees, you do have the opportunity to make recommendations to the employer. And I strongly recommend, if you need to push something through in a timely manner, use the 21-day recommendation by law that allows the employer to respond back in writing to your recommendation to make changes in your workplace. The survey questions have been designed to protect the confidentiality of the worker while providing significant demographic information to identify what groups are being affected by the various forms of workplace violence and harassment. I will note that the survey also looks at equity, equality, and inclusion. And one of the things that we have found out through our worker union members is that fear of reprisal seems to be a substantial barrier to reporting incidences of workplace violence and harassment. I also want to make a point that all of you who feel that you need to report something to the employer and you're concerned about reprisal, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, under Section 50, subsection 1, under reprisal, you are protected by the law. You cannot be intimidated, suspended, or dismissed. And if that does happen, you can call the Ministry of Labor and you can bring them in and they can have a good talk with your employer about the behavior on how you should be respected in your workplace. Some of the feedback survey questions include, have you ever missed work because of fear of harassment and violence in the workplace? And another question, according to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the definition of workplace harassment, have you ever experienced workplace harassment? Harassment and discrimination, have you ever experienced unwelcome comments that you felt offensive, embarrassing, hurtful, inappropriate jokes, slurs, rumors, hurtful gossip, and isolating behaviors? Just want to make a note that in December of last year, we reached out to the city and talked to John Tory to bring much awareness to the fact that we needed a transit worker assault awareness day. Our union will still continue to campaign to bring awareness to violence and harassment, bullying in the workplace. And we want to make a difference. And it's time that we make a culture change. And I think being here online today and having to talk to you all respectfully is we now have an opportunity to do that. So this last slide that I'm going to share with you is more or less an accountability slide or a takeaway. And it's questions for you. And it goes, does your company already have a risk assessment in process? And some of the risk factors that must be reviewed can include the cultural conditions, activities, and organizational structures of the workplace, circumstances external to the workplace, such as family violence. They could also give rise to harassment and violence in the workplace, which includes bullying. And your risk assessment should look at any reports, records, data that are related to the harassment and violence of the workplace, and the physical design of the workplace and the measures that are in place to protect the psychological health and safety of the workplace. I want to reiterate once again that the risk assessment is relevant to the Occupational Health and Safety Act under Section 32, and that your employer has a legal duty responsibility to do the risk assessment. They have a responsibility to make sure that they have a policy in place, they have a program in place, and that you, who are members of the Joint Health and Safety Committee or perhaps represented by the committee, have a say in the development of the policy. These are your tools. This is your opportunity to actually make a difference. And I'm hoping that everyone today can take the opportunity to make a difference. In conclusion, thank you very much for having me online today to talk to all of you. And in this brief presentation, I hope it has made a difference. And I'm asking all of you today to perhaps make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, very much. Bringing awareness to what's going on in our transit systems, and really giving those tools at the end there for all of us to take a look. I know we've got many different sectors that are experiencing increased violence and harassment, and certainly during COVID, things getting even more escalated. So appreciate you presenting today. Oh, did somebody have a question? Coming off mute? Oh, okay. So just looking at the chat here, and I'm not seeing any questions right now, but wanted to say Stephanie mentioned here that she's finding now that mental health is starting to be noticed and accepted and appreciated by employers and others as well. There doesn't seem to be as much stigma. You had mentioned at the beginning that it's just starting to kind of come out into the open, and people are seeing that now more and more for sure. It's a top priority, and it's a priority with the ministry as well. So, all right. And John's got some comments here. John, did you want to speak to the comments talking about the internal responsibility system? Go ahead, John.
You mentioned that there's a section in the Occupational Health and Safety Act that protects workers against reprisals.
Yes.
There was a study done by Andrew King and others that was published, and I put the link in there, that actually they looked into, they interviewed people who actually made use of that provision in the Act, and they found that the protections against reprisals don't really work as well as they were originally intended, and therefore they warned people about these, don't put your full faith in them because they're difficult to apply.
Thank you for that, John. Thank you. Andrew, any comment?
Well, my experiences with reprisal and having to use the Health and Safety Act and systems, we've gone directly to the OLRB board with that and providing a proper case on the situation that comes about. Our union has been very successful in defending its members based on reprisal. As a matter of fact, we had about six this year already on the employer not following the act, and the ministry was very swift in acting on the reprisal situation that had the field visit report and the detailed narrative indicating to the employer the consequences of reprisal, and the turn back on their behavior was very swift, and we had some very good results with that. So perhaps to help with the situation with reprisal, maybe having union representation and having someone there to make sure that the employer knows what the act is saying. And if we have to take it one step further and go to the OLRB, then we have done that, and our union has been successful with that.
Oh, thank you very much. And I think that might be, you had made a good point there, Andrew, about having the union being able to support you. I think it might be more difficult for people that aren't in a union and don't have the support from the union perspective as well. So excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
And we do have a quick question here from Deb. Actually, it might not be that quick of a question, but for your thoughts on this. I used to work with clients who were angry and abusive and was told that the nature of the job and the population and maybe the job itself was not a fit for her. So she was looking for, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, so, it's almost like it makes me wonder, do we have to, have we digressed to the point where we have to worry about fitting the job to the worker? And should we not evolve to make sure that we fit the worker to the job so that we can promote their success as being productive human beings? So really, if we're looking at trying to be successful in our workplace, and if all the talk that's been put out there by the employers with equity, diversion, and inclusion, would that not include the success of a worker being fit to the work environment? So my formed opinion on this is that we do everything we can to make another human being successful in the workplace.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. And just want to check in with Joanne. Any questions, Joanne, on our Facebook feed?
Nope, nothing here, Patricia.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Andrew. And
Yes.
You're going to stick around for the Q&A and questions at the end, yes?
I'll do the best I can, but it's an emergency. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay.